Welcome to the second episode of the Deep Wild Tech podcast, where we discuss UFOs, technology, science, and memes. I'm your host, Wild Trees. I'm a scientist who studies the paranormal. Today, I'm very happy to have a guest named Robert Bitto. Robert Bitto. Actually, I'll ask him how to pronounce it. But here's an introduction to Robert Bitto. Well, first of all, Robert Bitto runs Mexico Unexplained, which is a channel and a podcast on YouTube. And he also has a book named Mexico Unexplained. So here's the intro. Mexico Unexplained explores the magic, the mysteries, and the miracles of Mexico. Topics range from ancient mysteries to myths and legends to strange anomalies and religious curiosities. We also look into bizarre history, legendary creatures, and other worldly phenomenon. The podcast purpose is to provide information, not confirmation or affirmation. We will present what we have researched, and it is up to the listener to come to his or her own conclusions or research the topics further. The podcast host is Robert Bitto, who has over 25 years of experience in Mexico as a student, as an employee for a large multinational corporation, and as owner of an imports business, Sueños Latin American Imports, since 1999. He was a professional researcher by trade from 1990 to 1993. And in addition to his MBA and BBA, he holds an MA in Latin American Studies from the University of New Mexico. Well, thank you for being on the podcast. Robert, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for being here. Now, let's jump into the questions.
Okay.
Robert, when did you first become interested in the paranormal, and when did you start writing about the paranormal?
Well, the interest goes way, way back to when I was a little kid in elementary school. I would go with my mom to garage sales every Saturday morning, and I was on the hunt for books about weird stuff. Bigfoot, the Bermuda Triangle, ancient mysteries, the ancient astronaut theory, ghosts, whatever, stuff like that. And the paperbacks were 25 cents, the hardbacks were 50 cents. And I ate up all of that stuff, way back there in elementary school. And I still have all of those books on my shelf. And some of them I actually used to research for material from my podcast. So, yeah, I've had a long interest in this, and I've been writing about it only in the past 4 or 5 years. I started Mexico Unexplained formally on YouTube and also as an iTunes podcast in January of 2016. Yeah, so it's 4 years, and prepping for it. Before that, I was doing some writing on this. And as you mentioned, I have the book called Mexico Unexplained and a new book that was released 3 months ago called Mexican Monsters, the Cryptids and Legendary Creatures of Mexico. And so I do the weekly podcasts, and I'm really into this. I'm always on the search for interesting things, and I specify I limit the research mostly to Mexico. So that's my specialty. It's my little niche.
Wow, yeah, that's incredible. It seems like it's been a lifelong journey for you, studying the paranormal and incorporating it into your life.
Yes, and then with my business, as you mentioned, I've owned an import business that I started myself in 1999. I travel throughout Latin America, and according to one of my Yelp reviews written a long time ago for my store, someone called me the Indiana Jones of Latin American arts and crafts. And so basically what I do, there's a little truth to that. Basically,
I'm sure. No, I believe it. I believe it 100%. I'm just saying right now. I kind of hope that was true also. Go on.
What I do is I go to really remote areas, out of the way places to find my merchandise.
Yeah.
And so when I'm in these out of the way places, these small villages, these little mountain towns, whatever, wherever I go, always interesting little Fortean types of things jump out at me. And I was on a plane from Guadalajara to Phoenix one time, flying back from Mexico into the States, and I settled down in my seat with the magazine Muy Interesante. That's from a Mexican magazine. I'm not sure
Wow.
if you're familiar with it,
It
but
means
it's
that
a
it means very interesting.
yes, uh-huh. And a it's pretty science based. It's a magazine that looks at anomalous stuff. And I was on this plane and I was opening up the magazine and I saw pictures about crop circles and photographs I'd never seen before. And there was analysis by Mexican scientists. And I was thinking, there's a lot of stuff going on in Mexico that gringos and north of the border have never heard of before.
Sure,
And
of course.
a lot of it's trapped in Spanish. A lot of it never gets into the English speaking media. And
Absolutely.
so that's what I'm doing. I'm
Wow.
taking stuff that's in Spanish, and I'm also doing my own research when
Right.
I'm down there, and I'm uncovering things just through the course of business. I'll
Wow.
be in a town or whatever, and they'll say, "Oh, have you heard of the mermaid that lives in the lake in the volcano?" I'm like,
Whoa.
"Oh, okay, tell me more." Yeah, so
Wow.
that's how I get my material, and it's never ending. It's a
Wow.
bottomless pit. Believe me, it's
Wow.
fertile ground, and there's nobody really doing what I'm doing, so the field is open for me.
Absolutely. Wow. That's very exciting. Now, so do you mentioned this? Do people just open up to you without you having to pressure them or ask them? I always ask people, everyone I meet, I just start off like this. I say, "Have you ever seen anything strange, like strange lights in the sky?" And then they tell me about whatever, they tell me about poltergeist. But are people open in Mexico with you? Do they
Yeah,
just tell?
because people want to talk about things, and they're culturally, and this is not a value judgment at all. Culturally, I think Mexicans are more open to the paranormal
Okay.
because they're more open to what we would call being superstitious. In
Okay.
America, mainstream America, Northwestern European Anglo-based culture here, we tend to not think about. We don't look at the world as mysteriously as they do. So they're
Sure.
more prone to it down there, and so they'll talk about it. They'll talk about the vampire who lives in their village, or whatever, or the
Right.
thing they saw flying through the sky, or the
Whoa.
black-eyed kid who knocked on their door. They have that down there too.
Whoa.
Yeah, so there's lots of stuff, and yeah, people are very open to talking about this.
That's really interesting. I had no idea. I've traveled to Mexico when I was younger. My family's from Mexico, but I was too young to I was just eating candies, popping fireworks, basically. I wasn't thinking about these things.
Hmm.
Um, okay, well, let me ask you this. I thought about this earlier. You have a degree. You have multiple degrees in business.
Hmm.
You are a businessman. You
Hmm.
study the paranormal. Okay, here's a question. When it relates to strictly business, have you noticed any strange connections with the paranormal? How does the paranormal interact with a business, with the making of a profit? Have you noticed anything?
No, not really. Well, I guess if, well, okay, let me back up. In Mexico, it's very, very interesting that they're very more capitalistic than we are in the United States. And that
Whoa,
sounds weird because
yeah.
we in the United States pride ourselves on being
Hey,
capitalist.
I love cap. I eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Right, yeah, okay. But down in Mexico, if there's a saucer crash, if there's a sighting of this or that or whatever, all of
Okay.
a sudden a little carnival pops up.
Okay.
You'll have the balloon vendor, you'll have the old lady selling gorditas, you'll
Right.
have, all of these different things will pop up around wherever, paranormal event happens.
Whoa.
The Virgin is seen in the wall of this place. The next day there'll be a balloon vendor outside, and because there'll be a line, to see whatever it is, and then there's commerce connected with that. That's a very interesting question that you asked there, because that brought that to mind, that there is a lot of petty little commerce that goes hand in hand with this stuff. And some people think that that may motivate hoaxes, because there is
Sure.
money to be made off of this stuff, but
Oh
it
yeah.
usually happens after the fact and very spontaneously. So
Wow.
yeah, there is a connection. That's interesting. Yeah.
It is interesting. Yeah, I'm processing that. Now, the other thing you said is hoaxing. Okay, let's say it does, um, it does make an incentive to produce a hoax, a monetary
Mhm.
incentive. The other thing is that people have said that hoaxes trigger real paranormal events. You know,
I've heard that too. Yeah. So
Right.
yeah, it's hard to tell. How can we know, really?
I kind of picture the paranormal sometimes like this giant shark that's just swimming through the ocean. It's a big entity, and the shark has things attached to it, like these little fish.
Right.
And
Uh-huh.
the reason it's interesting, it's because something the shark does. So the shark sometimes will eat, be a messy eater, and all
Hmm.
these fish know there's little bits to be had, so they follow the shark's mouth.
Right.
And there's also parasites or things that can grow on the shark, right? And
Hmm.
so if I think of the paranormal as this shark, these little businesses popping up, they're kind of like the remora fish, or they're kind of like, these
Hmm.
little things that just are attached to the paranormal, but they're still connected in some weird way.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Let me ask you this: of everything like, what is your favorite paranormal incident or case?
Well, I'm a little partial to La Llorona, because
Wow.
when I was 10 years old, I thought I saw her. And
Whoa.
then there's a connection. Fast forward 40 years, there's a
Okay.
connection in 2019 that I had to La Llorona. But let me tell you the story. For those people who don't know the story, I'll give you the background.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's it's a story that is throughout Latin America, and it's also present in a piece of Latin America that is part of the United States, and that is New Mexico, and that's where I grew up. And so I grew up in kind of a white bread, piece of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Um, Very suburban. It could have been a suburb of LA or something, very kind of, but there was an underlying culture there. And, it didn't matter how mainstream we were. There's an underlying culture that dates back hundreds and hundreds of years in New Mexico, and it's still there. And along with that culture comes this legend of La Llorona. And here is what it is basically. A woman was very beautiful. She lived in this town. She married this handsome guy who was in the military. And he went off and did his military stuff. And word came back to the village that he was cheating on her. And she had two children. And in the stories, it's always two kids. And to try to get back at him, she took the kids to a river and threw the kids in the river. And while the kids were floundering in the water, she had regrets and tried to save the children, but then they were carried away by the,
Wow.
the rushing water and they died.
Yeah.
And so the legend goes that the Llorona still walks the banks of arroyos, acequias, like little channels for irrigation, and streams and rivers. She walks along the bosque, as they say in New Mexico, the wooded areas around
Right.
the water,
Absolutely.
and she snatches kids or tries to. So my connection with this is, we were in my fifth grade class, we were going to the teacher's house for a swim party. That's how this fifth grade teacher, Mrs. Klein, would end the year. She'd invite all the kids to go to her house to her swimming pool.
Sounds fun.
But since New Mexico is so poor, the school system's so poor, there was not enough money for a school bus to take us on this field trip. We
Okay.
only got like one school bus per year for whatever field trip. So
Sure.
what we had to do was take city buses to get to her house, and we had to make like three different transfers. So one of the transfers we were walking from one bus stop to another. We had to cross an arroyo, the Han Arroyo, which is closer to the Rio Grande than where we lived. And while we were crossing the arroyo, one guy looked down and yelled a very New Mexican expletive.
Okay.
And we all turned and we saw this lady dressed, this older woman in
Yeah.
black
Okay.
climbing out of the arroyo.
Oh,
And
okay.
what would an old woman be doing in the middle of the day in May, dressed in black in the bottom of a ditch,
Okay. Yeah.
climbing out of it? We then took off. We ran and ran and ran, and we stumbled over each other in laughter because we couldn't believe what we just saw, but we all saw it.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's my experience. And then fast forward to 2019. I can't wait to go see The Legend of La Llorona, the movie.
Yeah.
So I'm there like on cheap Tuesday, the cheap seats on Tuesday. So I
Yeah.
take off from my business and go say, hey, afternoon at the movies. So I'm sitting there in the theater and I'm watching this film
Yeah.
and I am seeing my merchandise from my business, things that I only carry,
Whoa.
the movie. Yes. And
Wow.
I get a lot of orders and, throughout the course of business over the months or whatever. And what had happened is the prop master for the movie
Yeah.
had bought merchandise from me like 6, 7 months before, and I didn't put two and two together. She told me she was buying the stuff for a movie called The Children. They
Okay.
kept it under wraps, I guess, the name,
Sure. Of
until
course.
it was released. So I didn't even think about that. Well, what happened with that movie? I don't know. People buy things from me and tell me they're going to use them for what, this and that and the other thing. And I don't know what happens to the stuff. And I'm busy. The next day happens, whatever. And so I'm sitting in the theater, and throughout the movie, there was this piece, that piece that came from me.
Yeah.
And it was weird because it was like, here's the connection to the Llorona once again, 40 years later, almost exactly 40 years later.
Wow.
So
That's
yeah, that's weird. But
a,
um, yeah, I don't have any other personal connections to these things, but I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who have witnessed things, and some things, even though I'm very skeptical, I'm inclined to believe might be real. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to tell, but it's all very interesting.
wow. That's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah, that you had such a personal connection later in the future with the film
Yeah.
and your personal merchandise showing up on the screen all those years later. Um, Let me ask you this: when you think of different aspects of the paranormal, what do you how do you explain them? Do you think the majority of them are like mass hysteria, the current one? Do you think the historical ones are maybe just stories that had a purpose or a lesson for the listener? I mean, how do you reconcile these stories that seem so fantastical in your mind?
It's really hard to. I don't know. I mean, the Llorona story, for example, you could say that it was told, or it still is being told to children to keep them out of the ditches, keep them out of the arroyos. Because, like in New Mexico, as a kid, I've seen water, just walls of water coming down these dry arroyos,
Right.
and you could drown easily because it can be raining 20 miles away a lot and bright and sunny where you are, and then here comes this this wall of water, and kids play in the ditches and the arroyos all the time. So in that case, it could be a cautionary tale. Could it be based on something? Maybe. I don't know. There could have been a woman who did that to her children, and then somebody could have seen a ghost or whatever, attributed it to her, and then the story just got out of hand. And then in other cases, I don't know what the standard of proof is. If you have several people talking about the same thing in different geographical areas,
Yes.
I'm thinking of one other thing that is very popular on my website, Mexico Unexplained, is the Lechuza, and that's
Yes.
a gigantic owl. There's there's a myth attached to that the gigantic owl is a witch. It's a woman who practices witchcraft. She turns herself into an owl, and then if you shoot this big owl, then the owl will then turn back into a woman. There's that story. Okay, that's kind of like a fantastical element to this. But people are seeing gigantic birds. I am 100% sure of that because I get contacted constantly from people, the southwestern US, California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and then northern Mexico. I get
Whoa.
stories like you would not believe.
Whoa.
So, what's with these stories? What is this creature? Could it be a cryptid, a a an unknown animal that hasn't been described by science? It's possible. People don't realize that there's a lot of empty space out there, especially if you live in a city and you think everything's crowded and you believe in all of this overpopulation propaganda and stuff. Most they call the middle of America a flyover country for a reason. There's not a whole lot of population there. And in northern Mexico, there are endless deserts where there could be creatures that just live unmolested by man. So I'm inclined to believe that some of these mythical creatures are real.
Wow. Well, that's great. Wow. Those are great observations and connection of the dots you're making. But you're referencing specifically, yeah, these creatures. Let's just take the one you mentioned, which is giant flying animals. You're getting reports that are constant and they're in areas. There's like a territory to these.
Right.
Um, yeah, definitely. That could be an actual animal there. Now, something that's difficult with flying animals um, is the distance involved from the viewer and the animal. Well, I mean, I know some stories, maybe they're close, I don't know. Perhaps you've heard some stories where the animal is like a couple of feet away from the person.
Yeah,
Those
like
exist as well.
getting hit by their car. Yeah, getting hit by their car. You can't really get any closer than that. Yeah, I've a few yards away to, the car accidents, and then, you know, in the tree in their yard. That's pretty close.
That's very close, right?
Yeah.
So if those are the minority of the cases and most of them are far away, the problem is this is a problem for UFOs as well. Is that yes,
Hmm.
everybody has cameras now, but these
Right.
cameras were specifically built for taking pictures of an object that's a few feet away from you.
Right.
That and they're just not built for taking pictures of something in the sky. So I mean, a solution to this would be go to the area where these things are seen a lot. Maybe recruit some citizen scientists. Maybe just give
Hmm.
them an attachment for their phone that and train them a little bit.
Hmm.
But yeah, that could be a real possibility. And that and what you said about space, I also believe what you said about space. There's so much space. I said this on the last podcast, but humans are very selective of where they live. We only live on the surface of the crust of the planet. We
Hmm.
don't live underground, which there are lots of cavern systems. We don't really live in the ocean, on top of it, underneath the ocean.
Hmm.
And the sky, just the sky. We don't live in the sky. And so this is a lot of real estate for life to live.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so talking about cryptids, this is kind of going into your latest book, which is Mexican Monsters. Um, you're an author, so with this latest book, what was the process of writing it from start to finish? Uh, what has it been like writing a book?
Well, it's been interesting. This last book, it was hard for me. I don't know why. I guess the timing was bad. I released it in October, and October is the busiest month for my business. But I kept on editing it and re-editing it and all of this stuff. But to your question about the process, what I do is I investigate a topic. So in this case, I'll investigate a creature, and then I will gather together all of the research and then write an episode. And then the episode becomes an episode to the podcast, and then I do a slideshow accompanying that episode and put it on YouTube. So then that becomes a chapter in the book.
Right.
And the reason why I did Mexican Monsters, my first book was an anthology of about 100 shows put into the book.
Right.
And then this second book was just a compilation of all of the mysterious creatures, because I saw that that was the most popular category of the categories that you mentioned at the beginning of the show that I concentrate on.
Interesting.
So the creatures were popular, so I said, okay, let's do a book about creatures. So then I took the shows and then I expanded a little bit about them. I put in each chapter Mexican monsters sidebar. So then I added something, on top of what I had already written. And then for each creature, I have a heading in the beginning of the chapter where I talk about if it has other names, a brief description, habitat range, current population estimates, and when the first sighting was. So I have that template for each creature, for each chapter in the book. So yeah, it was difficult to do the second book. I don't know why, but it took a lot out of me. But I'm very happy with the final product, and I guess other people are too. One day I woke up in November and I had 18 new Twitter followers that were writing in Asian characters for
Wow.
some Asian language, and I couldn't read it. And then I took a screenshot and put it on Facebook, and I said, I think I'm popular in Asia. And then a friend of mine from elementary school who was a missionary in Japan said, oh, that's Japanese. All those people are Japanese. And then I went on my Amazon Kindle publisher statistics. I went on the website to see
Right.
how my book was selling, and I saw
Absolutely.
all of these Japanese purchases. So
Wow.
yeah, I guess they like their monsters. The stereotype is correct.
That's great. Wow. You're international. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, having spoken to you now, listening to your background, I think you're the right guy that I want to ask for help.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about this before. So what I want to do, what I like to do, is pitch a TV show that I actually want to sell. I actually want to do it. Okay, so if someone's
Okay.
listening and they produce TV shows, or they know somebody, just like forward it to them. And if not, just imagine the show. If you're listening. So Robert, can I tell you my idea? Can you listen to it? Give me constructive criticism, and together can we make this like something workable? Do you think?
Yeah. Well, I'm up for that, but are you sure you want to let your secrets out? And
That's
I don't
that's a
know.
good first question, Robert. I'm glad you asked. Well, my idea is I want this idea to be out in the world, and I'm
Okay.
okay if somebody else does it. I just want to see some movement. And that
Okay.
leads to the reason why. So maybe you're asking like, why did I even come up with an idea for a TV show?
Yeah.
What's my purpose? Well, what happened was I was talking to my friend, Dr. Johnny Blaylock, and he's a medical doctor. We were having a discussion about how to fund paranormal research. Okay. Now, the traditional avenue for funding scientific research is to apply for a grant with an organization or the government. Okay. Now, this is not available for paranormal research. Okay. Now, these research grants could be for several $1,000s, what it takes to see the project to its completion. So then I came up with the idea is an entertainment product. I said, what if we can fund paranormal research by also making it an entertainment product? That's where the idea started. But as I developed the idea, I started thinking, okay, um, I want to hedge my bets. So I want to make this show so that even if there's no aspect of the paranormal present, it's still a very good show, and it could still make profit. And the reason is because what the show is going to be is show a team conducting scientific research, and I believe that just research in itself is incredibly entertaining. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So a couple other things I want to get out of the way first. Okay. First of all, I think this TV show will be dangerous. Anybody working on it directly in the field, I think they'd be put in the same amount of danger as someone working with a great white shark, a hippopotamus, or like a tiger. I mean, perhaps as dangerous as all of them combined, minimally.
Wow. Yeah. Could be. Yeah.
Yeah, got to put that out there. So a physical would be very important before the show, after the show, and there have to be access to medical teams at all times, which I think TV shows already have anyway.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so then the goal of this TV show is going to be to capture photographic evidence of the paranormal. That is my research goal. And why is this important? Because if you just catch good images of paranormal activity like lights, you can actually analyze these lights. You can measure distances, the luminosity, the characters of the light. You could tell a lot about it. If you have video, you could, and you see a light, you could tell like distances. And a lot of the paranormal does have a visual aspect to it. If whether it's a Bigfoot or, like I said, a UFO in the sky, a globe of light, even poltergeist activity, things moving around, right? So my goal is to capture video evidence, and the show is going to be a team of researchers trying to catch video evidence of the paranormal that could be analyzed. But then I got to tell you, you already know this. It's difficult to do this. It's very difficult to get evidence. And so here's the hypothesis I have about the paranormal. I believe that when we're dealing with certain aspects of the paranormal, we're dealing with an intelligence that is as intelligent as man or more intelligent than man. And so if you're a researcher, you're studying an organism or a form of life that's more smart than you are, then it kind of moves into counterintelligence work. You actually become a spy in that case, because you're no longer researching a type of mushroom, your garden variety asparagus. I mean, whatever it is, it's very intelligent. So you have to adapt to this if you're going to effectively study it. So that being said, now I'm going to explain the details of the show. Okay.
Okay.
And the last thing I got to say is that there's going to be two layers to this whole endeavor. There's going to be a surface layer, and then there's going to be a true layer. The surface layer is like a layer of deception, basically. So I'm going to have to separate both of these things. So I'm first going to explain the surface layer of the show without really mentioning any paranormal aspect, because we're doing counterintelligence work. Then after that, I'll reveal the hidden layer of what's going on, okay? And then I just want to lead off with a quote by an author. He also has a podcast named Radio Mysterioso. I'm a huge fan. His name is Greg Bishop. And this is his quote. It says, "Mimic the obliqueness of the subject." You should get this as a t-shirt at Zazzle.com. I think all proceeds go to Greg. So here's the first layer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find a location that I wanted to conduct a scientific project. Now, this project is going to deal with insects. Okay, this is an insect project that I want to do in an area with a team, and I want to get results, and I want to publish these results in a journal, an academic journal. Okay, and this is very entertaining to film. Okay, because I've done a lot of research projects. You know, romances pop up, adventures, a lot of comedy. It's really entertaining. Mm-hmm. So the details are, me and my team are going to ride around an area outdoors at night with a bicycle. And the bicycle is going to have like, it's going to be maybe like a tricycle, a little bit bigger. It's going to run on electricity, also gas, and it's going to be human powered as well. And we're going to have a little portable battery. And on the back of the bicycle, we're going to hang a big white sheet. If you could imagine this, okay, a white linen, just hanging on the back of your bicycle. And there's going to be a light at the top of it, okay? So this is a technique called night lighting to catch insects. What you do, you go out at night, you put out a white sheet, and you just put a light, and they literally just come to you, okay? And yeah, you don't have to dig around the mud, you know, you don't have to get in the lake. These beautiful insects will come to you. You could either photograph them, or in our case, we'll do a combination of photographing these insects. We'll also collect some specimens, and then we'll record all the data. And I think we're going to find new distribution records. I'm pretty sure we could find a new species of insect, and we could just name it after the studio. Whoever's producing the show will be like, hey, we're probably going to discover a new species. We'll just name it after you. It'll be great. This will be the project, okay? Now, those are the methods, kind of. Here's the team, okay? I could lead the team, or someone like me, okay? I've gotten grants and fellowships to do scientific projects and finish them to completion. And I'll be honest, like these were just animals like shrimp or moss, not the scariest animals, but I was working in very dangerous environments with dangerous weather and dangerous animals. So I am familiar with certain aspect of danger when doing this type of work. I would be the leader, field leader for the project. My goal is to make sure everybody's safe, make sure the project is running correctly, and that we get a publication. I'm going to have a co-leader, so someone who's just going to be one step up underneath me. Then there's going to be a medical person, okay? So we're going to have a medical doctor. And by the way, everybody in the team is going to be CPR certified, and they're also going to first aid certified. And then we'll have a research assistant who's helping get data, and then a photographer, a videographer. There's also going to be a home base that's not going to be in the field, but in the city close to the field. There's going to be two research assistants there working on the laboratory part of it, and there's going to be a camera person there. Okay, so it's a skeleton crew. We're running very light but very efficiently because during the nighttime, the field crew is going to be getting all the data, and then they're going to give it all to the lab crew at the hotel or wherever, and they're just going to work on it. So the project is going to keep moving. So by the end of the season, we'll have a paper we could submit for publication. The other thing is everybody's going to have cameras on them at all times. Every individual that I mentioned is going to have at least 3 small, lightweight cameras, like GoPro cameras. Maybe like one available on their hip, maybe like, one on their like a helmet cam, and they're going to have one just in their hand. And everybody's going to be tasked with just recording whatever they think is cool, because we all know we're trying to make a fun TV show and educate people about a scientific project. I think it's very interesting. So those are some of the basics of the show. So I know if I do this, I can produce. I can have a publication. And I mean, this is something I go to the Discovery Channel, History Channel, I don't know, all these channels, right? Okay. That's the first layer. Let me give you the layer of deception. Okay.
Okay.
So what I haven't mentioned is that I'm going to pick a paranormal hotspot to do the research. I'm sure you know about paranormal hotspots. I believe they're all over the world, especially Mexico. I know of a few spots in North America where they're at. If I were to define a paranormal hotspot, it's an area that for whatever reason, this area, sometimes the size of a basin, several small cities fit in this area. You see all kinds of paranormal activity. You see the UFOs, you see the poltergeist, you see Bigfoot, you see dog-headed men. I mean, everything you've ever heard of happens in these areas. Who knows why? So we're gonna film there, okay? Because we're gonna saturate ourselves with the phenomenon, okay? Now, everybody who's going to be involved in the show knows that we're trying to catch paranormal activity, but none of them are going to acknowledge this. As far as they know, they're just all skeptics. They don't even know this is a paranormal hotspot. They're just researchers studying biology, okay? So the other thing is that they're all going to have cameras, right? They're all going to be recording everything, but there's going to be hidden cameras as well, okay? So there's going to be hidden cameras in the equipment, in the bicycle and everything that are going to purposely be shooting away the opposite direction of where all the people are filming, okay? And the people that are on the show, they're acting, they're not going to know, they're not going to acknowledge, they're going to know the cameras are there, but they're not going to acknowledge them at all. So this is kind of another way to maybe get something filmable. We're basically just trying to trick whatever's there. And I guess that's about it, really. There's a few other details. I have specific ideas of certain types of paranormal activity, how they work, and how we can entice them. But I'll just leave it at that, Robert. What do you think?
Well, I don't know if a viewer would get into these 2 layers. They're not going to, if they're tuning in to see something paranormal.
Yes.
They're not going to be interested in bug collecting or whatever. I don't think necessarily. I don't know. I could be wrong.
Right.
But I don't know if that. I understand what you're trying to accomplish by going out and doing some hardcore research on reality, hoping to entice this paranormal stuff. But I don't know if it's a very interesting and a very unique idea. I don't know if the multiple layers would be necessary for a a show though. I don't know. It might be too complicated for people to follow along.
Right.
I don't know. From a perspective of a scientist, from your perspective, no problem. You have a clear idea on what this is all about. But I don't know. I'm not sure. If you had something more direct, I think it's more sellable given the climate we're in now. I don't know. It's
Interesting.
interesting though. I'd say move forward with it and see how it's received.
Thank you.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
Go.
one thing though, you were saying about photographic evidence and stuff. Wouldn't it be nice if would be a show out there that would go after just physical evidence? I mean, you can photograph a shadow in a forest and claim it's Bigfoot or a black-eyed kid or whatever, but capture a black-eyed kid and bring him back to the studio. Now that's a show. Um,
Yeah. Well,
shoot a Lechuza and bring it into the studio. That's a show. I
gotcha.
mean, physical evidence. I don't see shows dealing with that. You know, the photograph stuff. I think there are quite a few programs that get into that sort of thing. And
Interesting.
photographs can be faked, and everything. But if you capture a real black-eyed kid and bring him into the studio, I mean, that's something that no one else has ever done before. But I don't
Interesting.
know. I mean, go for it, do it, and see what happens. Pitch it, make it more formal than just speaking about it on the air like this. Write it down and make it like you're making a business plan. I could be wrong about the appeal. I don't know. I mean, I think for American audiences, you want to try to make it as simple as possible to have a wider appeal, but I don't know. I mean, that's my opinion. I'm not a TV producer, but I think you should put together a business plan, like a model of what this is, put it on paper, and then start talking to people who are in the industry producing shows, like for these networks and cable channels and stuff like that. And just try it. You've got to do it. If you have this idea, you've got to go forward with it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your frank uh, input. Well, I do
Sure.
have some points to point out. The things I could maybe
Okay.
clear up a little bit. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So the first thing is this show not being straightforward enough, or the appeal not being there with the layers of deception, which I
Hmm.
agree with you. Okay. Well, the thing that I want to remind you of is that, I mean, this is what is going on behind the scenes. This is how the sausage gets made. It's not
Hmm.
exactly what the sausage looks like at the end, you know? So, for
Right.
instance, if we film this show and nothing paranormal happens, then we never even mention it paranormal. We don't market it as a paranormal show. We just say, here's some research being done. You know, these are the personalities, you know?
Oh,
So
okay.
there's no like confusion. Nobody even knows that it was even a paranormal thing. It's kind of like hedging your bets kind of thing.
Okay.
But if there is paranormal activity, well, then I agree with you. Then it becomes tricky. But at that point, maybe we could just, upscale the paranormal stuff and downscale the biology stuff.
Hmm.
That's just one small point. Now, the other thing, and I agree with you on this, is the physical evidence. Okay. I have a couple points. I have thought about physical evidence, and there's a reason why I chose photographic evidence. Okay. Well, I'll say right now, what you're saying about catching a lechuza, that's a great example. Okay. I do have a plan, a specific method of how to capture, um, I guess what you would call it. It's got a lot of names. There's no like, there's no Linnaean nomenclature. Nobody's written a paper to say what it's called. So the names are a little loose, right, for these legends and these entities. But let's just call this entity like a poltergeist, an
Hmm.
invisible agent that follows people around, and that it is not solely caused by the person themselves. So it's an individual entity that's invisible, follows people around, sometimes known as a poltergeist. I think there's multiple causes for these, but the one that
Hmm.
is an actual entity, I do have a detailed plan on to capture one of them. Okay. But I didn't think about producing that as a TV show. I thought about doing that strictly as science, maybe later down the road, because this is a very dangerous. I see in capturing one of these things, it's incredibly dangerous, I think,
Hmm.
and it wouldn't be justifiable to put people through that much unless you had like. So the photographic evidence is where I want to start with the show because I think the risk is there. It's still very high, like I said, but it's less. But I do have a plan on how to capture a poltergeist. The other thing was that you mentioned the physical aspect of the paranormal. A lot of people talk about the non-physicality versus the physicality of
Right.
paranormal, the
Right.
material versus the immaterial.
Right.
There's a lot of things that just I don't know. So I guess the aspect is maybe some of this paranormal stuff isn't always physical. So
Right. You even take something like Bigfoot, and
right,
you have people who believe, and Bigfoot researchers, wow, they're entrenched a lot of times from what I've seen and who I've come face to face with. Even with the phenomenon like Bigfoot, some people think that it's a spiritual being, that it
exactly.
doesn't even really have a body, and that's why we've never found one. And then other people say it's the missing link, or it's on the hominid tree, or whatever. So yeah, even when you take one sort of thing and look at it, people will debate whether it really is real or whether we could even get physical evidence. So I see what you're saying. Yeah.
But if we're just going to talk about physical evidence, I do have to say that research is being done.
Hmm.
I'm sure you know about this, but it's being done specifically with UFOs. And one researcher who I love very much, truly love this man, never met him, but Jack Valet,
Oh
okay,
yeah. Hmm.
Jack Valet.
Yeah.
Jack Valet is actively working on. He's going to places where they have maybe a sample of a craft, and he's studying them at a molecular level, at a atomic level. He's studying the
Hmm.
isotopes. That
Hmm.
is the kind of research that's being done now with physical. So it's very specific, though. It's
Hmm.
not the feather from a lechuza. It's not
Hmm.
the hair from Bigfoot. It's not
Hmm.
Mothman spit or anything like that. It's like it's part of the craft.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So back to your show, I'd say flesh it out, put it on
Yes.
paper, and then go for it.
Great. Great. And really, I wanted to get it out in the air, and I just thought it'd be goofy to talk about. And I did want to get your opinion because of your background. Yeah.
Yeah. Go for it. Yeah.
Um, okay. Well, thank you for that feedback. What's
Sure.
interesting, earlier you mentioned two legends because my mom's from Mexico. She grew up in Reynosa and Tampico, kind of coastal, no, like border towns, kind of.
Hmm.
And before this interview, I asked her, like, hey, I told her about you. I was like, I told you about her background. Is there anything you want to know about? Do you want me to ask him? And she wanted to know specifically about the Lechuza and the Llorona. First, actually, she said the Llorona, and then she said Lechuza. So those were two that are
Wow,
very
that's
distinct.
interesting. Yeah, because yeah. Wow, cool.
She mentioned it.
So has she had any sort of experiences with those two
Yeah,
paranormal
she
things? Yeah.
she has.
Oh, cool.
Just well, it's maybe not as intense, but I'll tell you, my mom just said that when she was a little girl, I mean, she grew up with a lot of sisters, uh,
Hmm.
pretty poor, in Mexico, and sometimes it would be so hot. I think this house was like just stone. It was like a stone house,
Hmm.
and so in the summertime it'd be hot, and so she would have to sleep. Her and her sister would sleep outside, and look out at the sky,
Hmm.
patio or whatever. And then I guess grandma, her mother, would tell her to go to sleep, or the Lechuza was going to get her, or something like that. And so she was just terrified. And she just went to sleep scared.
That's funny.
And I'm not sure what her background is, Jerome. I think it just made an impact on her, and she just heard it a lot. She heard that story a lot.
Yeah, that's throughout, like I said, throughout Latin America and into the United States, the former parts of Mexico, like where I grew up, New Mexico. It's a very common story.
Awesome. She did ask about another thing that also got me thinking. So I don't know what the culture is, but is there a culture in Mexico that practices binding of the skull to shape the skull into a different uh, shape, basically?
Well, the ancient Maya used to flatten the forehead. Um,
Okay.
so that's why you see in a lot of the monuments the murals, carvings, any depictions of like the nobility, you'll see that the foreheads are flat, and they would do that as in the infancy of the child. They would put them on a board and then put this flat board on their head.
Right.
And yeah, so they did practice that in
And what
the
was
ancient.
as you read, what was their rationale for doing it? What do we think was the
No one
rationale?
knows. No one knows.
Whoa. Okay. Crazy. I this is another story that happened to me in Mexico, and I told you about it, and we had a brief discussion about it. But I wanted to ask you some follow-up questions. Okay.
Okay.
And you've made videos about this. And once again, this is a very common thing in Mexico, but perhaps some of our listeners never heard about this kind of thing. Egg magic, basically. I don't know what else to call it. But I was in Mexico one time. It was in Durango, so it was like a really arid inner country of Mexico. And somebody was sick, and one of my aunts, I think, or my grandmother. I was a little kid, and this individual was sick, and so one of my relatives got a raw egg in a shell and just passed it over to the person. Might have prayed, done some other things, but then she got this egg in a shell and cracked it into a glass full of water that was clear. And I remember I went around to look at it, and the egg was cracked, so it had the yolk and everything else, but it looked exactly like an eye. Like it wasn't a passing resemblance. Like it had eyelashes, the pupil, cornea. And then you were kind of blasé about it. You're like, oh yeah, that happens all the time in Mexico. It's very old, goes back forever. So, is there any science to this? Like, was I having a mass hallucination as a little boy? As far as that
Well,
specifically, what do you think is going on?
it's a tradition that's been around forever, and it
Yes.
goes back into indigenous times. I think they used turkey eggs
Mm,
because the turkey was a big staple food
yeah.
for the ancient Mexicans. But yeah, it's a very common thing, and you have people who can read what it means. They'll
Yes.
crack the egg in water and then they'll stare at it, and be all profound and come up with whatever assessment. It's usually connected with health. So if
Sure.
someone's sick, that's what they do, and then they read it, and then it's supposed to have curative powers too. So
Well, I mean,
yeah,
I read it. I read it as an eye, but I had no
yeah.
idea how to interpret it.
And you know what? All that I have seen about that sort of thing in my travels and also in the Spanish language literature is I've seen it described. I've never gone into, or I've never seen a history of this, where it came from, what it means exactly. I've just heard it described, and that there are people who can read it, and
Right.
it has these curative powers. But there's not much out there explaining that this whole tradition in depth. I'd be curious to go a little deeper in that too.
It
But
reminds me of. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was going to say, but alas, there are so many things to investigate.
Yes, it's true. It's true. It's an ocean. Each droplet is another mystery. Um,
Right.
well, I was going to say, especially for that case, I recently published on my page an article about how frankincense, which is like, one of baby Jesus's presents,
Right.
frankincense it was found to be a psychoactive antidepressant.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah, and I went ahead and bought some, and I feel great. Well, it smells good. I'm not sure. Well, I might to use it longer, but yeah. So, and they use that for ceremonies. You go to church, you go to like Orthodox church, Catholic church,
Hmm.
and they use it. But yeah, it smells good, and it's a psychoactive antidepressant.
Well, that's interesting.
Now I think with the egg, I was going to ask you, do you have any more directions for the how it's used? Like, did you have steps that you've read or something, or a general idea of how exactly from start to finish you go ahead and perform this egg magic?
From what I understand, the egg gets passed around, and then it's also rubbed against around the person's body, whoever's sick.
Yes.
Sometimes they do that. They'll rub it on the person's body before they crack it into the water.
Right.
So that's a pretty common practice. Doesn't always happen. They'll rub it on their body or sometimes just their forehead. But in most cases, that's how they do it. And then they crack it into the water, and then sometimes you'll have someone staring at it.
Yeah.
for a while, kind of like how Nostradamus used to look at bowls of water to come up with his predictions. It's that sort of thing, I think. There's
Oh,
a specific term for that. I can't remember it right now.
right.
I think it's not scrying, but it's something like that where you're staring into water to predict the future.
Wow.
So it's something similar to that where you can stare into this egg in water and get the information you need for a cure, or you can see a little bit into the future, whatever, you know. But that's usually how it's done.
Wow. Okay, well, great. Well, thank you for filling in some blanks, and it looks like there's still a lot more to this
Oh yeah.
particular mystery.
Yep.
Well, can you please tell us, like, what is the future for you? Are you gonna are you gonna write another book? You can continue your show. Is there a different project you're working on? Something in the future you're looking forward to?
Well, I think it's steady as she goes for me. I've been in business for over 20 years now, and I continue to go down to Mexico. I'm planning another trip to the state of Guanajuato to go to some small towns I've never been to before. I'm planning that trip next month, and that's strictly business, but strictly business never is strictly business because the paranormal and all this weird stuff always rears its head. You know, I'll probably be in some town and someone will say, "Oh, do you know that statue of Jesus bleeds?" or something like that. So, um, in the future, I'm still taking buying trips for my business. So I'm still uncovering things. I'm still doing research stateside, probing into Spanish language materials and, basically bringing that out to the English world. And another book is probably on the horizon. As I do more shows, I get feedback from the listeners and the viewers, and I'll probably do another compilation. I don't know, maybe later this year or early next year. So the shows, I drop the shows on my website every Sunday evening. They go on YouTube Monday morning, and I'm pretty regular with that, even with stuff going on in my life. Last year, I skipped twice only because I went back to New Mexico. My father turned 92 years old. So I went to see him for his birthday, and then I had appendicitis. So I was in the hospital. So
Whoa.
those are the
Yeah.
two times, the 2 weeks. Otherwise, I had 50 shows last
Whoa.
year. So I'm pretty regular with that stuff. So for the future, it's steady as she goes. It's going to be more of the same. And like I said before, it's a never-ending supply of stuff. Things that I don't even know about now are out there that I will talk about in the next few months. So it's never a dull moment at Mexico Unexplained.
Well, it's been great having you. Thank you so much for giving us a glimpse into your life and your adventures. And thank you specifically for the feedback you gave me and just your time. Thank you very much, Robert.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and good luck with all of your ventures. And I'm really interested and curious to see how all this works out with this television show.
Thank you very much. It might just be a goof, but thank you, Robert. I guess I'll talk to you later. Thank you so much.
All right.